Hip hop has always been this incredible music of collage, of reinvention. It's built on taking something old, a drum break, a vocal, a little horn stab, and flipping it into something brand new. But how does that actually work? Today, we're going to go deep into the art of sampling, and we're not just going to look at it as borrowing. We're going to see it for what it is, a deliberate architectural process for building entire new worlds out of sound. Okay, let's get into it.
And honestly, who better to set the stage than the legend himself, Chuck D of Public Enemy? This quote, it's the perfect starting point. He's not talking about stealing or being lazy. He's talking about composition. He's putting the sampler right up there with a guitar or a piano. It's an instrument, a tool to arrange sound. That's the exact mindset we need to really get this.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the basics, then get into how samples are used to build the very foundation of a track. From there, we'll see how producers add all these layers of personality and meaning, how the art form helped define a whole regional identity, the legal drama that changed the game, and finally, how these ideas ended up conquering the world.
Right, so what are we really talking about when we say sampling? It's so easy to just write it off as, oh, they just took a piece of an old song. But in hip-hop, it's the foundational artistic tool. It's all about taking a recorded sound, pulling it out of its original home, and giving it a new life, a new context, to create something that just couldn't have existed before. Okay, so here's the textbook definition for you. You take a piece of a recording, that's your sample, and you reuse it. But the magic word here is how you reuse it. That little slice of sound becomes your new instrument. It's the paint for your canvas. It's not a simple copy and paste job. It's a total transformation. Let's get into the mechanics of it. The first and most fundamental use of a sample is what musicologist Amanda Sewell calls a structural sample. This is where the song is born. Seriously, think of it like building a house. You can't do anything until you've poured a solid foundation. And that's exactly what a structural sample is. It is the foundation. It's that looped element that gives a track its core rhythm, its harmony, its whole vibe. It's the part that gets your head nodding before a single word is even rapped. It's the musical DNA that the entire song is built on top of. And boom, this is the perfect example. What we're looking at are the guts of the Notorious B.I.G.'s classic, Juicy. That entire iconic groove is built from just one intact structural sample, a loop from an R&B hit by Mutum called Juicy Fruit. That whole feeling, the synth, the guitar, the bass, it's all one piece of music, lifted and looped to create the foundation for an absolute masterpiece. Now, what's so cool about this is that it shows two completely different ways of thinking. On one hand, you've got that intact structure, like Biggie's Juicy, which is just so clean and elegant in its simplicity. But on the other hand, you have the aggregate structure pioneered by producers like Public Enemy's Bomb Squad. These guys were like sound collage artists, stitching together tiny, unrelated bits from tons of different records to create this dense, chaotic, and totally original wall of sound. Okay, so if structural samples are the foundation and the walls of our musical house, what about the furniture, the paint on the walls, the art? Well, that's where we get to surface and lyric samples. These are the things that give a track its unique personality and its voice. It breaks down pretty simply. Surface samples are basically the decoration. They're not part of that main repeating groove, but they drop in to add a little spice or texture. Think of a single horn stab or some kind of dramatic sound effect. Lyric samples, though, are all about the human voice. Producers use another artist's words to create a conversation, pay tribute to their heroes, or just add a specific flavor they couldn't get any other way. And for a perfect and, let's be honest, hilarious example of this, you have to look at the Beastie Boys. In their song Eggman, they sample the iconic shrieking violins from Psycho and that menacing theme from Jaws. It creates this intense feeling of mortal danger. All for a song about them throwing eggs at people as kids. It's just a brilliant, brilliant use of sampling to add this thick layer of pure irony. Now, these techniques aren't just for making cool-sounding tracks. They're powerful enough to forge entire identities. So let's take a look at how hip-hop artists from the American South use their music to confront history and build a whole new regional narrative. So you gotta understand where the term Dirty South even comes from. It was never just some catchy name. As Cujo from Goody Mob lays out in this incredibly raw quote, Dirty was a direct shot at the systemic racism and the economic inequality they were still dealing with in cities like Atlanta. The music became the way they could talk about that reality. And they didn't just talk about it. They put it right in your face, visually. In magazines, on their album covers, artists started taking these old symbols of the South, like the Confederate flag, and just completely reappropriating them, sometimes literally setting them on fire. It was this hugely defiant act of taking back their own Southern identity and redefining it completely on their own terms. But right as this incredibly complex, sample-heavy art form was hitting its creative peak, it ran headfirst into a brick wall. And that brick wall was the law. This collision would fundamentally change the sound of hip-hop forever. And man, it happened fast. In '89, De La Soul's masterpiece album, which was full of hundreds of samples, gets hit with a huge lawsuit. But the real turning point, the one that changed everything, was in 1991. A judge ruled against Biz Markie, and he didn't just rule against him, he quoted the Bible, saying, "Thou shalt not steal." That effectively criminalized unlicensed sampling overnight. Suddenly that dense, beautiful, collage-style production was legally and financially impossible for most people. And the effect was immediate and just staggering. Just look at this chart. It shows the average number of samples per track on major albums right before and after that '91 ruling. I mean, look at that drop. It's not a slope, it's a cliff. The dense soundscapes of 1990, with over 4 samples per track, just vanished. By the late '90s, producers were down to using less than 1. The entire creative process of the music was forced to change. But here's the thing about artists. They innovate. They adapt. Producers came up with all these new techniques to get around the law. Flipping a sample became this high art form. They'd chop a tiny piece of a record, speed it up, slow it down, reverse it, twist it all around until you couldn't even recognize it anymore. And then you had replaying. Geniuses like Dr. Dre would just hire world-class musicians to meticulously recreate a bass line or a melody, capturing the feeling of an old funk record without having to pay the massive legal fee for the original recording itself. But even with all these legal hurdles, the core principles of hip-hop that focus on rhythm, on self-expression, on telling your story, were just too powerful to be contained. The art form was ready to go global. And it just found a home everywhere. In the UK, it mutated and became grime. In Japan and South Korea, it fused with local sounds to create these huge scenes like K-hip-hop. Across the continent of Africa, artists started using hip-hop as this incredibly powerful tool for social and political commentary. And then, of course, the internet came along and blew the doors wide open. An artist in Nairobi could make a beat and share it with the whole world, instantly. Which kind of brings us to a final thought for today. From digging through dusty crates for that one perfect drum break to painstakingly chopping a tiny vocal snippet, sampling has always been about human choice, about context and curation. In a world where AI can just generate endless music, the story of sampling is this powerful reminder that creativity isn't always about making something from nothing. Sometimes it's about having the vision to see the new in the old. It's about the human touch. All right, let's talk about the secret DNA of so much of the music we love. I'm talking about sampling. It's this incredible story of art, of conflict, and, believe it or not, a conversation that literally wraps around the entire globe. So let's get into it. Okay, so picture this. You put on a classic hip-hop track. You know the one. The beat just hits you and your head starts nodding immediately. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, what am I actually hearing? Is it just one sound? One instrument? Or is there something way more complex going on under the surface? Well, the answer is, it's a blueprint, a super intricate, layered collage. Think about the iconic beat from Biggie's Juicy. You might think you're hearing his band, but you're not. What you're actually hearing is a synth, a guitar, a bass line, and those drums, all lifted piece by piece from an old '80s soul track. They were woven together to create something totally new, something legendary. So, really, you have to think of these producers less like traditional musicians and more like sonic collage artists. Seriously, they're like musical archaeologists, digging through crates of old vinyl, hunting for these little fragments of magic, a perfect drum break, a funky bass line, a sharp horn stab. Then they take all these pieces and assemble them into whole new worlds of sound. It's an art form that's literally built on the shoulders of the music that came before it. But to really get what's happening, you need to speak the language. And lucky for us, musicologist Amanda Sewell has basically given us the secret code. She breaks down samples into 3 main types. Once you know these, you'll hear music in a completely different way. First up, you've got the structural sample.
Just think of this as the foundation of the house. It's the bedrock, right? It's usually a looped piece of drums or a bass line or some chords. It's the thing that creates the main groove of the track. It's the part that just repeats and repeats and gets stuck in your head. It holds the whole song together.
Okay, so if the structural sample is the foundation and walls, next we have the surface sample. This is all the decoration. It's the paint, the furniture, the art on the walls. It's a sound that doesn't loop over and over. Instead, it just pops in to punctuate the groove. You know, like a quick horn blast or a little guitar stab. It's all about adding flavor and personality.
And last, but definitely not least, there's the lyric sample. Now this one's different. It's special. It's a sampled piece of someone's voice. Could be one word, could be a whole line. It's not really there to build the beat. It's there to send a message. It might be a nod to an older artist, or it might create this cool back and forth dialogue. It's a way to literally inject history and meaning right into the song.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. The legendary producer Ninth Wonder totally backs this up. He said that for most producers, lyric samples are seen as this completely separate thing. They're not just another instrument, they're, in his words, a decoration or a special gesture. It's an intentional choice, a nod that has its own specific job to do.
So for a long time, this amazing art form just flourished. It was like the Wild West, this big legal gray area. But then it all came to a sudden, screeching halt. And what happened next was a collision that literally changed the sound of music forever. The late 80s, man, that was the golden age. You had albums like the Beastie Boys' Paul's Boutique that were just these insane masterpieces packed with over 100 samples. But then came 1991 and the party was over. A huge lawsuit was filed against Biz Markie for using just one sample without permission, and it became this landmark case. After that ruling, everything changed. Suddenly, sampling without a license wasn't just frowned upon, it was a huge, expensive risk.
And the judge in that case, whoa, he didn't just make a legal ruling. He made a moral statement. He opened his ruling by quoting the Bible, "Thou shalt not steal." That's it. That one line sent an absolute shockwave through the industry. It basically reframed this entire creative art form as just plain old theft. And the change was immediate. You could hear it in the music. Before 1991, sampling was big, it was bold, it was layered. You were meant to recognize the samples. But after the lawsuit, it became way more cautious. Producers used fewer samples, they started digging for records so obscure nobody would ever find them, and they started chopping and flipping sounds until you couldn't tell where they came from. The art of collage basically had to become the art of disguise. But here's the thing. Sampling didn't die. No way. It just got smarter. Producers are endlessly creative, so they adapted. They started digging way, way deeper for those obscure records. They perfected the art of flipping a sample, chopping it, changing the pitch, reversing it, until it was a ghost of its former self. And they even came up with a really clever workaround, hiring musicians to just replay a part. That way, you get the vibe without having to pay for the original master recording. Genius, right?
And this whole art form, it was never just about making cool beats. It was, and still is, a really powerful way to build an identity. And you can see this so clearly in the American South, where artists use sampling to literally talk back to history.
So when the group Goody Mob from Atlanta came up with the term Dirty South, it wasn't what you might think. It wasn't about celebrating being gritty or whatever. As Cujo from the group explains it here, the dirt he was talking about was racism. It was about the old power structures that were still running things even after the civil rights movement. It was a raw, honest statement about the world they were living in.
And they used really powerful visuals to drive that point home. Just look at this magazine cover from 2003. That's Atlanta rapper Bone Crusher holding a burning Confederate flag. And trust me, this was not just for shock value. This was a very deliberate, very powerful act of redefining a symbol. What was happening was that Southern artists were having this deep, intense conversation with their own history. They were taking these symbols of the Old South, symbols that had been used for oppression, and they were flipping them. They were reappropriating them. Through their music, through their style, through their art, they were building a brand new story of what it meant to be Black and from the South. A story built on their terms, full of pride and resistance.
So, from its birth in the Bronx to its powerful reimagining in the South, this secret language of the beat just exploded. It went global, creating this massive cultural conversation that reached pretty much every corner of the map.
And here's the cool part. Hip hop didn't just get exported, it got translated. It wasn't just American music playing in other countries, it was a spark. In the UK, that spark morphed into the raw energy of grime. In Japan and South Korea, you had artists blending it with their own traditional sounds, creating these huge new scenes. In South Africa, it became this crucial tool for social and political commentary. And then, of course, the internet just threw gasoline on the fire, connecting everybody and making it a real-time global thing.
All of this just goes to show you, sampling was never just about grabbing a cool beat from an old record. It's always been about starting a conversation. It's a dialogue between artists, between generations, and with our collective cultural past. Every single sample is another link in that huge, amazing chain.
And that's really the heart of it. I think the legend himself, Chuck D from Public Enemy, said it perfectly. He didn't see it as theft at all. He saw it as composition. He said that arranging sounds from a record is basically the same thing as a musician arranging notes from a guitar or a piano. It's the same act of creation, the same act of expression. So that leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? We've seen how a simple beat can connect a soul band from the 70s to a K-hip-hop star today. We've seen how it can give a voice to people fighting against injustice. How it builds these incredible new worlds out of tiny pieces of the past. So I'll leave you with this. Is sampling really theft? Or is it something much more profound? Is it a conversation happening across time? That's something to chew on the next time you hit play on your favorite track.
Okay, so how does a sound born on the streets of the Bronx become the most dominant cultural force on the entire planet? It's an incredible story, really. A story of struggle, of pure innovation, and a beat that just could not be contained. So let's dive in and trace this unbelievable journey. First things first, let's get our terms right, because we're not just talking about music here. We're talking about poetry, we're talking about storytelling. This is a lyrical art form that grew up as part of a whole cultural movement. And trust me, that distinction is absolutely crucial.
So, where did it all kick off? Well, our story starts in one place and one place only, the Bronx, New York City, back in the early 1970s. This is where the foundation was laid, not just for the music, but for a whole new way of life.
You know, hip-hop didn't just appear out of a vacuum. It was a direct response to some really harsh realities of the time. We're talking about communities dealing with serious poverty and violence, who decided to choose creativity over conflict. With almost no resources, they literally invented an art form with whatever they had. Turntables, spray cans, their own voices. I mean, it was the ultimate act of creating something incredible from nothing.
See, hip-hop was always so much more than just rap. It was a whole culture, really, built on 4 distinct pillars. You had the DJs, right? Legends like DJ Kool Herc, who were basically sound scientists, manipulating records to create brand new soundscapes. Then you had the MCs, the rappers, who gave that beat its voice. The breakdancers gave it a physical form, an energy you could see, and the graffiti artists, they gave it a visual identity that took over the whole city. Every single part was essential to the whole thing.
So once that cultural foundation was set, the music itself started to evolve. And I mean it evolved fast. It was this dramatic shift, moving from what we now call the old school to the new school.
And the speed of this progression was just astonishing. It all starts with these local block parties, right? But then, in 1979, Rapper's Delight hits the airwaves, and bam, everything changes. All of a sudden, this sound from the streets is a national phenomenon, and by the mid-'80s, a whole new generation was ready to take it in a much harder, more complex direction.
And the difference between these two eras? It was night and day. The old school was all about the party. It was upbeat, it used live bands, and it had this simple, really infectious rhyme scheme that you couldn't help but move to. The new school just flipped the script entirely. The themes got darker, reflecting those aggressive sounds of the street. The music went electronic, built on drum machines and samples, and the lyricism, well, it got way more intricate.
The message was a true watershed moment. I mean, this was one of the first times a major rap song totally moved away from party boasts to deliver this potent social commentary about the grim realities of inner-city life. The poetry was now protest. And from that one spark, a whole firestorm of new voices just erupted. You have the political fire of Public Enemy's conscious rap. You have the raw, unflinching journalism of NWA's gangster rap. And so critically, you have these powerful female MCs like Queen Latifah bringing a completely new and necessary perspective to the front. The genre was just exploding with diversity.
Now, for decades, hip-hop was pretty much defined by this rivalry between the East and West Coasts. But by the 2000s, the entire center of gravity shifted. The South had something new to say, and it was about to take over, well, everything.
And the thing is, the South wasn't just one sound. It was this amazing patchwork of unique, vibrant scenes, each with its own flavor. Down in New Orleans, you had the parade-ready party music of bounce. Go over to Houston, and you get that syrupy, slow-motion Scrooge style. Atlanta and Memphis gave us the high-energy, club-shaking sound of crunk. And then a sound came out of Atlanta that would change the whole game: trap.
So, trap music. It gets its name directly from the trap house where drugs were sold. It started as this raw depiction of that life, but its sound, defined by those deep 808 drums and this DIY spirit, was so infectious that it broke out of Atlanta and became the defining sound of popular music for an entire decade.
Which brings us to the final, and maybe the most incredible, part of this story. How on earth did this American art form become a universal language, spoken and understood in literally every corner of the world? The growth was just exponential. Think about it. From a few blocks in one New York borough to a national movement to a truly global phenomenon. That little ripple effect we talked about, it became a tidal wave.
And as it spread, it adapted, it morphed. In France, for example, artists grabbed the microphone to talk about their own struggles, transforming hip-hop into this powerful voice for immigrant communities facing racism and economic inequality.
Over in Asia, the fusion was just remarkable. Japanese artists started blending the genre style with their own unique cultural sensibilities. And in South Korea, the scene evolved into the global powerhouse we now know as K-hip-hop, which is a massive industry all on its own.
And this is where the story kind of comes full circle. Across Africa, artists started using hip-hop exactly like its pioneers did, as a tool for social commentary. It became the soundtrack for activism, a way to talk about everything from government corruption to human rights.
So, what was the fuel for this global fire? One word: technology. The internet completely changed the game. All of a sudden, an artist in Nairobi or Seoul didn't need a major record label. They could record a track, upload it, and connect directly with a global audience. It democratized music in a way nobody had ever seen before.
And even after conquering the world, hip-hop never lost its soul. In 2014, this one line from Kendrick Lamar's All Right became an anthem for a whole new generation of activists during the Black Lives Matter protests. It was this powerful reminder of the genre's deep roots in resilience, struggle, and ultimately, hope.
You know, the journey from a neighborhood's cry for expression to the entire world's common tongue, it just proves that a powerful idea, when you set it to the right beat, can truly change everything. So the only question left is, what's the next chapter in this incredible story?